It's a fantastic program, and I always am super inspired by all the work that everyone on this call is doing. So hopefully we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight. I think the bio covered it. I just love working with founders and I love helping them tell their stories. I've been doing it for a long time in lots of different ways. And we were just talking about the capitalized pitch competition, which is underway right now. And we're ushering those founders through to the finals. But I think at the end of the day, we meet so many really talented people who are bringing incredibly impactful work to market, and being able to tell your story, whether it is to an investor, partner, customer, employee, partner, whoever it is actually a critical component to your success at the end of the day. It is what gives you the power to recruit, engage, and get people excited about what you already know is fantastic work. So I'm always really excited to help. And so today is really an interactive discussion. It's your chance to workshop things and get feedback, which is critical. And so we're just going to have some fun and play around with it and hopefully learn from each other, if that works. So with that, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. And there we are. Okay, so I was asking Julianne before you all got on the call. I think we're going to just start a little bit with this idea of a fundraising journey. And I know from looking at a lot of the kind of the early applications to the Big Bang and some friendly faces that I see on the call that I know, that a lot of you are thinking about raising funds to grow your ventures, and that's great. But it isn't everybody's journey, and it doesn't have to be. And so I think, like, before we jump into how to pitch your company, and I will share this deck, so we're not going to read through it right now. I just want you to know that this is here for you. But I think it's really important for you to sit down with your team and really think about, are we going to raise or not raise as we think about building our company? And there's some pretty important considerations as you think about that, because fundraising is a full-time job. It's hard, and it comes with strings attached. When you bring in other people's money to your venture, you're accountable to people outside of your team, and that's a pretty heavy responsibility. And I think about especially at the friends and family round, because these are people that you have to have Thanksgiving dinner with next year, and so, I mean, obviously when you get to venture and stuff like that, it's our business to make investments, and we know that there's a risk in that, but we manage it that way too. So but starting with those early checks, a lot of times those are your relationships. And so I think it's really important to think through whether you're going to raise or not raise. And here are some of the questions that I would encourage you ask yourself as you think about that. I'm not going to dive into it right now. If the answer is yes, which we're going to assume for today that it is, there's a starting point. And I think, some of the things to consider as you get started on that journey are who on your team is going to be the fundraiser. Like I said, it's kind of a full-time job. And so a lot of times this is the CEO's job. Obviously, they're doing 2 full-time jobs as they start to launch the company and fundraise. But you really need a leader. You need somebody whose job it is to be accountable for this work. You need to really sit down and think about how much you actually need to raise and why. And then, some questions that often get asked are like, when should you start raising? Where do you start? And then I think the encouragement is to really surround yourself with the right people who can give you feedback along the way. So some of these questions we'll start to answer here as we move through these slides, but I think having intention behind the action is really important. And sometimes you know, there's this assumption that, like, we call it tech crunchitis. It's like, oh yeah, we're starting a company. We're going to go on Shark Tank, or we're going to raise millions of dollars. And like, that's just the journey. And it's not always the journey. It doesn't always need to be the journey. But if it is, then really having a plan in place is important. Again, I don't want to burn a ton of time on this today, but I will share this. As you get started and as you think about raising, there is this kind of staged approach to onboarding capital into your company. There are different sources of investment. There are different investment vehicles, and there's some things that you really need to think through in terms of your ownership of the company as you kind of go through the process. And I think we really love investing very early with our founders so that we can help kind of guide and coach them through this process to help them as much as possible preserve as much equity especially in the early stages as they're building their company. So you can see here that at each stage, there's kind of some key activities and common use proceeds that we see across these different stages. And it can vary company to company, but these are the kinds of things typically that we're seeing. So if you're getting started, this is kind of like a sales process, and we encourage you to approach it that way. You are building a pipeline and a process, and it isn't kind of, it's not unknowable. There's not this like magic action. Oh, I'm going to go to this event and run into an investor and they're going to write me a huge check, or I just have to go to as many pitch competitions as possible and people will fund me. It's like there's actually a process of identifying investors that have a thesis that's aligned with the company you're building, investors that invest in the stage that you're at in your company building journey. So if you were to walk into or try and get a meeting with an investor that invests in companies that are Series A and beyond in, you know, enterprise SaaS or something, and you are a pre-seed med tech company, that's not a fit. They're not going to write you a check, and you're wasting your time and their time by like trying to, you know, schedule that meeting, right? So doing your research, building that pipeline, identifying the firms that you think are good targets and points of contact within, reaching out to your network to see if anybody has shared connections, figuring out that pathway to them. And then once you get there, really identifying, like, are they actually writing checks? A lot of companies aren't, you know, where are they at in their kind of deploying capital phase, right? How much do they usually write checks for? Do they have relevant background that could support you beyond a check in growing your business? So these are some of the things that you want to think about. It's like you kind of want to have a plan before you get to it. And as you're building that plan, really track your work. So a CRM, or I mean, really like a spreadsheet or an Airtable, you know, and this just will help you identify the outreach that you've done and kind of track where those things are at. It's just like a sales process. You're like, okay, I need to raise $2 million. How am I going to get that? You know, and, you know, this is the way that you can start to develop a plan to reach those targets. And so finally, and then I'll pause for any questions before we jump into the deck. There's a fundraising toolkit, and here are some of the kind of things that I recommend you think about beginning to put together if you're thinking of going on this journey. And you don't have to do it all at once. These are things that you'll build over time, but I guarantee you some of these things will be very commonly asked for. So it makes sense to start to think about, you know, kind of building that toolkit. Today, we're going to talk briefly about elevator pitches, and we'll go through kind of one example of a shareable high-level deck that you'll want to have. But in addition to that, a lot of times founders, they have multiple decks, not just one, depending on the audience. And trust me, you'll feel like you have 500 decks by the time you're done with all this, because you'll get feedback from so many people and you're constantly iterating. And I know it's a huge source of pain, but you're not alone. So maybe take, take that to heart. But anyways, and the detailed deck is really a good leave behind. So this is the one where maybe you have more information or details that you can leave behind with investors after you've pitched the high level deck. You will need a data room at some point. We're not going to cover what's in that today, but you can tons of information online about what you should include in that. Affordable email is something that we really encourage our founders to provide us with. And this is something that really is a very simple email template that helps somebody introduce you without having to do a lot of work. So you can give it to somebody and then they can forward it to somebody you want to be introduced to and connect you. So that's really important. Depending on your company, and I see this a lot in our kind of more complex companies, having FAQs that are really easy to share, that address some of the questions that you get asked about your product or market, are helpful. A 2 to 3 sentence value proposition. This will be in your deck. It should be in your executive summary. And again, it's just something that is really easy to cut, paste, share. If you're being featured in a pitch competition or other things, a lot of times people will ask you for that as they're listing the companies that, they're presenting. 2 more things: multiple ways to share information. Product demos that are video product demos, an executive summary, website deck. We are constantly trying to promote and amplify the companies that we invest in. And depending on who we're talking to, we need to send materials. The easier you can make it for me to share the great work that you're doing, the better. And so if I'm introducing you to a potential customer, having a product demo video is awesome. I can be like, hey, we've invested in this company. They've got a solution I think would be perfect for you. Check out the product demo. Let me know if you want an intro, right? Like I can cut, paste, send. Really easy. So these are the kinds of things, again, as you have a toolkit, and I say that for customer introductions, for companies we've already invested in, but it serves for fundraising and sending to other investors as well. We already talked about the investor CRM. And finally, I will say that along the way, you're going to get tons of no's or not yet. And in those conversations, I really strongly encourage you to ask those investors if they wouldn't mind if you kept them updated. If you get an opt-in and they say, yeah, that's fine, keep me updated on your progress, I'd like to hear, then you've just gotten permission to share your traction, your progress with them. And you should do that. The number of times that I've seen our companies get funded by somebody that initially said no, sometimes like 2 years later, because they did a really good job of building their list and sharing on a regular cadence. Depends on the team, the company, et cetera, could be quarterly. Just the milestones that they were hitting and the traction that they were seeing, hugely powerful. And the last thing I'll say about this is fundraising isn't a one-time effort. This is something that if you are seeking venture backing is going to be your life for the next probably 5 to 7 years, right? And so you're building long-term relationships. You are building a process that you'll have to go back to time and again. And the earlier that you start to build systems around this and cadences around this, the more effective you will be in the long run. So I think really encouraging you not to think about this as a transaction, but to think about it as a relationship and really treat it that way. And that is like with communication, with as much consistency as possible. So before we jump into the actual pitch, I want to pause for any questions or comments. Very good. Yeah, go ahead.
So on one of your slides, I saw a new word, runway. Can you kind of like elaborate on that? Like, what does that mean? I saw
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for
okay.
asking, Dashina. That's a great question. And so when we think about how much we need to raise, what we're really looking at is how is that money going to get us to the next round, basically? What are the things that need to happen with that money? And how is that going to get us to the next round and the next stage of growth? The runway is how many months, typically it's measured in, that money's going to last you based on how much you're spending every month. And so you want to, at each stage, give your team enough runway to actually get the job done. And so before you raise, you're looking at, okay, what work do we think we need to do? How much do we think that's going to cost? And then you kind of break that down and you can say, okay, if we raise this much, we can do these things by this time. Those are your assumptions. And that'll get us to this next fundraising milestone. Great question. All right. Yeah. All right, let's jump into the pitch. And I can only see like a couple people on my screen. So I'm hoping, Julianne, if you see anybody raise their hand or whatever, let me know. Okay. All right. So what is a pitch? All right. A pitch is actually a persuasive story. It's a persuasive argument. We're really making the case for the company that you are building. And so it is your job to create a credible and defensible and persuasive story. That's what you're doing. You're building a case. What it is not is a data dump. Okay, so we're not trying to lift up the hood and show everybody exactly how this thing is coded and how it works, right? We don't need to go into this level of detail in our pitch. And that may seem obvious, but trust me, it is easier said than done. And it is not what we typically see, especially with our technical founders who love what's under the hood. Of course, that's what they're doing, right? So we're looking for credible, defensible, persuasive, and inspiring stories, and not in the weeds data dumps. There is a hero of your story, and it is not you. Does anybody want to tell me who is the hero in your story? Yes, go ahead, Kenneth.
I'll go with the product.
Good guess. Does anybody else want to chime in?
Maybe the customer.
Yeah, I can't see who said that, but that is correct. It is the customer. The customer is at the end of the day, the person that your product is going to serve, right? And without your customer buying your product, you do not have a company. So your customer is indeed the main character in your story. And the better that you can tell investors the journey that your customer is on and then how you are transforming their world, the more likely you're going to excite and invite them into your story. Because at the end of the day, your customers are the ones that are going to generate the revenue and growth. And if you're proving that you have something that a customer will want, that you're filling a really compelling customer need, and you can show that there are a lot of these customers, you're really telling the story of market opportunity. But the way that kind of and I always say this, our investors are people too, may not seem like it sometimes, but investors are people too. And at the end of the day, people resonate with stories. And So connecting with your investors through a really compelling story, oftentimes hitting on emotion as you tell the story of your customer and the problems you're solving for them, the more repeatable that is, the more memorable that your investors will find, kind of what you're sharing with them, and the more repeatable it is, the more viral it can go. And so we really encourage our founders to think about the hero's journey, and the hero is the customer, and they start out today in this world that has challenges and obstacles, and they wake up and they're on this quest and they have this obstacle that they're facing. It might be, and Dashina, can I use you as an example? Okay, so Dashina has a really cool product, and it is a comb that has the ability, it has the oil inside the comb. It dispenses for hair care. If I butcher it, Dashina, I'm sorry. But like and this is a problem for her customers today. They wake up, if they want to do their hair, it takes 2 hours. It's totally messy. So they have to get up super early, and, then they have to do all the cleanup, and it's just such a hassle. But, when the hair is done and done well, they feel like professional, beautiful, presentable, whatever, right? Like this is a thing that they want to accomplish in their life. But today, they don't do that, because who wants to get up 2 hours early, and the oils and all the things, right? So that's today's world. Enter Dashina's product, this low-cost, innovative way to apply the same oils. It now takes 30 minutes, no mess, right? And now every day, this woman who wants to show up to work feeling beautiful, professional, presentable, whatever it is, can get up and do this without the pain of the cleanup, right? So her journey has been transformed by Dashina's products, right? And that's a very simple and butchered example. Sorry, Dashina, I did my best, but of the journey that this
You did
customer
great.
is on. Thank you. You know what I mean?
Excited.
And so we just want to take them, on this journey. So I'm going to actually stop with any questions here, because then we're just going to do a little practicing. So any questions on that, or anybody want to push back on it, or share an example of how this has really worked well for you, or you want to share your customer's story or anything like that?
Well, it's kind of like, it's like you want to be the hero because you provided the product for the customer. It's just always like stuck in your head. Wait, I'm the hero because I provided this service for the customer. And I understand that it's the opposite. It's the but yeah, that's why we do what I'm saying? That's why we create the product, is because we want to be the hero. That's what I believe.
I feel that, and a lot of times you're not alone in that. But I think what's really interesting is watching, at the end of the day, it's about how many of these customers can you solve that problem for? And that's where, the market opportunity lies. And so being able to really demonstrate that you understand and empathize with who your customer is, and as a result, have been able to build a solution that's really meaningful and impactful, demonstrates, as a founder and an innovator and a company to invest in, that you really love the problem you're solving, and that you're able to bring good solutions to bear.
So Monique, if we're not the hero, who are we then?
You in the Luke Skywalker story, you're like the lightsaber. You're the tool. You are not Luke. But yeah, you're not the Jedi. That's your customer, but you're giving them the tools they need to conquer the obstacles they have in their life. And so yeah.
So how would you effectively integrate this into a pitch or a slide?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we're going to dive into that here in just a second, but maybe tell me a little bit really briefly about, give me problem solution customer for you. What are you looking at?
For us, the problem is that many people have these old old bikes that need niche parts that they can't find, and bike collectives have these parts, that they can't sell to the public because they're too niche. And we're bringing the two groups together.
Great. Marketplace models are fun to tell this story, but you just did a really good job. And so what does the world look like for your bicycle owner before you come to market? What happens to their bikes if they can't find the parts?
Let's say they like bought it when they were young and it's really important to them, but then a part breaks and it's important to them. They need to find something, but it's gonna take so long to like look through eBay, find the right part, just like find the part they need and also trust the person. And for bike collectors before this, it's impossible to find someone in real life in your city that's gonna buy this kind of really cool niche bike part.
Yeah, I mean, I think you already kind of explained it. And so, and when you set up your problem statement, you're really kind of sharing like, you know, the story of the person, like, here's Sam, meet Sam. He got his first bike when he was 13. It's a prized possession. He loves this thing. And one day a part broke and Sam can't use his bike now, right? But he really doesn't want to throw it away. That's wasteful. It's important to him. What does he do? Well, you know, on the flip side, we have XYZ Collective, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, Sam and the Bike Collective don't know about each other. That's today. So we've built a solution to connect the two. And now Sam has an easy place to find his part and he can fix his bike, and this Bike Collective is able to, you know, provide that part, right? And so you're just really painting that before and after in a way that shows like, hey, there's a sad person over here and this is what's happening to him. And now, boom, enter us, and no longer is that the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to share?
I have a quick question, because I feel like part of the issue is being able to make the pitch concise enough to tell a story, but then also explain your product and like what it is. You know what I mean? Like, especially if you only have like a 30-second for these competitions, 30 seconds to a minute, something like that. It starts to get pretty tight in terms of time.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I'm a huge fan of the story pitch. And sometimes I share this with founders and then they give me a novel. And I'm like, no, short story, right? Like you're like movie trailer size, not the full version, you know? And so I think it is really important to like, you have to workshop it. You have to figure out what lands with people, and you have to pull out like the most compelling parts of that story. When you have 30 to 60 seconds, we're doing the elevator pitch. And I put two very popular Mad Libs up here. You know, I think they're okay. I don't, you know, I'm not like over the moon about them, but I think they're a good starting point. And I think you can use these to begin to see like, what are the pieces if I have 30 seconds that I'm going to include? And how do I get that story in a really short period of time? For example, the lean stack one is a good example of how to get, like, let's use Kute's example. When bike owners who love their bikes have a part break and they can't use it anymore, they want to fix it. They don't want to throw it away, but they can't because the bike is old and there's no place that sells those parts that they know of. Today, they just kind of are sad, or they have to make something up, or I don't know what they do today, right? But and you know, it just doesn't exist, or whatever the existing alternative is, right? So we built this solution to help connect those bike owners to bike exchanges that have the parts and can solve their problem, right? And that didn't take very long for me to get through that, right? And so we can do that. And in 30 to 60 seconds, you're not going through your business model, the market opportunity, your competition, your fundraising ads. You're just trying to get like this initial story across. So an investor would be like, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more, right? And so we're not trying to, and it's funny because I said this before, it's not the data dump, but like you say 30 to 60 seconds to some people and they're like, do you want to see how fast I can talk? Right? Like, and that's like cramming in is like, they try and get like 5 minutes into 30 seconds. It's like, no, don't do it. So I think it's, it's really like, what are the most compelling pieces? So maybe tell me what you're working on. And I'd love to see if we can get it into 30 seconds.
Yeah, so we're working on a skateboarding shoe company that features a wide toe box. And the reason for that is most modern shoes have a narrow tapered toe box that, at the large scale leads to foot pain and foot ailments like bunions, plantar fasciitis. But as far as like a wide toe box shoe for the athletic needs for skateboarding, that just doesn't exist in amongst any of the shoe companies going right now. And so we're just trying to kind of fill that hole, which will hopefully increase athletic performance, allowing your foot to work as a real foot, and also decrease those foot pains over decades of wear of modern shoes.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so like when you say increased athletic performance for a skateboarder, tell me a little more specifically what that means when they put their foot on the board with a wide toe box. What can they do that they can't do with a narrow toe box?
Precisely. So I'm talking typically for like, stuff that's in the Olympics, right? Like skateboarders who do tricks, like they need to
That's okay.
manipulate their
Yep.
board, they go down rails, they flip it, all these stuff. And so it's a sport where your feet are what you're manipulating or using to
Mhm.
manipulate the board. So having foot function, it definitely, in that communication to the boarding, like that's definitely a huge aspect of the athletic sport. And so in terms of having a wide toe box shoe that allows for wide toe splay, kind of imagine doing a handstand with your hand spread out versus having it kind of crunched together. You're going to
So
be much more
balance and
stable.
control.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Great. Yeah. So you got it. So like when competitive athletes like skateboarders, want to compete and get the most out of their performance, they want to achieve like, you think of the adjective like high performance, right? But, it's not optimized today because they're using narrow toe box shoes, right? Like the shoes on the market today don't allow for maximum amounts of balance and control. So they're using these narrow, what's on the market today, right? So we've built a wide toe box shoe that maximizes balance and control, increases performance, and by the way, also prevents long-term foot pain and whatever. So something like that. Do you see what I'm saying? So we're kind of walking through it, and then pretty quickly you've covered a lot of stuff. You've covered a lot of ground. And then again, investors will be like, great, wow, how many skateboarders are there that would like this? And then you can go into market opportunity pricing, all the things.
Okay.
Make
Yeah,
sense?
I guess my question is like having this kind of story first, like hypothetical person that's experiencing the issue or so first, then introduction of your product. Is that like a very typical template? As far as what I've learned so far, I feel like what I've been introduced on how to
This
do the
is your
pitch is
elevator
kind of
pitch.
like your
Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
I feel like what I've been told what to do is kind of like your slide on the screen now of like, this is my company, this is what we're developing, this
I
is
know.
the
I hate
target, this is the problem.
Yeah. You don't love
So
that.
is the
but
story
yeah.
based like, more advantageous and efficacious essentially?
I think it depends on who you're talking to and what the purpose of the conversation is. But like I said, I think investors are people too. And so if you're telling a really succinct and clear story, then you've covered all the same information, right? And so if you look left to right, you're covering the same information, you're delivering it in a different way. If you come up to me and say, hi, the name of my company is this, I'm making a wide toe shoebox for skateboarders. And it's better because of foot pain. That's like one way of telling the story. It's pretty succinct and your offering is pretty clear. For more technical offerings, sometimes I wouldn't be able to repeat that to the next person. Whereas if you tell me the story of skateboarder X or in the example of Dashina or whatever, it's like, I can tell you how you've changed somebody's life, before, after. I can repeat that much more easily than a technical description. So it really depends. And I think let's move into how this translates into a full deck, and then we can circle back around to see if that makes sense to you.
Mhm.
So when we're thinking about kind of a full intro deck, these are some of the questions I'd like to encourage you to think about answering by the end, right? Who cares, right? Like, we care about our companies and our products. We're super excited about it, right? But who else cares, and why should they care? Why now is a big one. You know, timing, market timing. You might hear investors, really the investor mindset. A lot of times they're thinking, as they're listening to your pitch, who's on the team? Is the timing right? What is the market size, total addressable market? You know, what traction have you had already? And what are the terms that you're looking for? Those are some of the questions going through an investor's head. And so here, it's like, who cares, right? Why now? That's timing. What evidence? That's traction. And why your team? And the who cares is your customers and the market size, right? So we definitely want to be able to say that we've ended with that. Okay, now I have to move you guys out of my way because I can't see my slides. Okay, so yep, we need a title slide. Again, let me just say, going into this, you're going to get all sorts of feedback in all of your pitch presentations, and this is an art, not a science. Please take this information, apply what works for you, discard what doesn't. You know, you're going to get feedback from a lot of different sources. There's great information out there. So this is a starting point, but it's not, you know, gospel by any means. So title slide should represent, you know, basic things: company name, tagline. Depending on what your company is, you might want a product shot, logo. I like to have the founder contact information on the first slide and the last slide. And you know, oftentimes I think it's helpful to include, like, where you at, like, is this a slide deck for a pre-seed raise? So here's an example. I want to say that I pulled a ton of these slides from TechCrunch. They have a really awesome series where they do teardowns of pitch decks. And I really, really encourage you, as you're building, to look for resources like this. And they have the link for their work at the end of this deck. So you'll be able to plug in and do your own kind of research and reading around this. But they do a really great job of doing deck teardowns across different stages of fundraising. But here's a good example of a title slide. It gives you a lot of really good information. It's pretty crisp and clean. And then we go in from here. First slide, I have a really hard time personally with pitches that don't start by laying out the problem for me. And that's just the way my brain works. I've definitely seen presentations where this isn't the format, and it's, you know, it's like still a good company and all that. But for me, explaining the problem is really critical, because I think it lays the foundation for me to understand what's coming next in your pitch. Like, why are you starting this company? Is this important? Like, why should I care about this? And for me, it really kind of, I'm already doing the math as you're talking about the problem, in terms of, like, is this a big problem? Is it a problem for a lot of people? And, you know, those are kind of market opportunity deductions that are coming from the story you're telling, right? There are lots of different things. And the way that this deck is structured, just so you know, is on the left on many of these, I put like some notes on what you might consider putting on the slide. And then on the right are questions that you might ask yourself as you're thinking about the narrative that overlays the slide as you're talking about it. So these are just prompts. So on this slide, there are different ways to represent the problem. I'll show you a couple of them. The most impactful image, I say, like, if you have like a really heart-tugging problem, a really powerful image is worth 1,000 words. I'll show you an example of that. Sometimes there's some really compelling data that can help define and anchor your problem in people's brains. And other times there's a personal story that people will tell, and they were really motivated to personally start a company because of an experience that they had. And oftentimes that can be really compelling as well. So here's an example of the most impactful image. This is actually a company that came out of UC Davis. Growth Factory is invested in them. And he is a technical founder. I mean, he's building a business that is not easy to explain, but basically they have a company that helps embryologists identify healthier embryos so that IVF can be successful the first time. So his problem statement, he doesn't have to say a heck of a lot more. You've got this, and he says, this is how many needles this mom had to go through to get to conceive this child. Pretty impactful right out of the gate, right? And there's not a question that you wouldn't want that to be the experience. So I think he did a really, really good job defining the problem and immediately engaging the emotions of the people who are watching the presentation. You have my attention now, right? Here's an example of someone who chose a different approach. And again, these can be found in TechCrunch, but this is, the data play. Like, here is the UTI problem. And here's some really compelling data that demonstrates that this is actually an issue. And again, it depends on your audience. UC Davis, you have a lot of technical founders in really highly regulated, complex industries. And a lot of times you're presenting to peers and investors that expect and want very data-driven presentations, and that expect and want you to demonstrate kind of your expertise and the data backing up your claims. And, that's not the case for every kind of company. So skateboard company with the toe box, you're probably not doing a data-driven problem slide, right? And then here's the example of a personal story, right? And this person, had, his grandmother had Alzheimer's and there were no treatments, right? And so you can start with, here's how this has impacted my life. Here's why this caught my attention, and here's why I want to solve it. And here, then he goes into really defining, here's why this is a problem. So a couple different examples. On the flip side of that is the solution. So I look at it as, again, I've said this a few times, the world before and the world after, the world today and the world after you. So the world today in IVF is, it's really difficult, and I'm not going to give his pitch, but like, there are all these things that make IVF difficult today. And then he unveils his solution. This is, but in the world tomorrow, after our solution, this is how it'll be. So this is your exhale moment for everybody. It's like, this is going to be great, right? It may seem obvious, but your solution should tie to your problem slide. And I've actually seen where that's not the case. Somebody will define this huge global problem of climate change and then talk about something over here. And you're like, wait, how did those connect? And so I think it's just really important that there's a direct correlation between problem and solution. So don't get too esoteric with that problem, right? Like, you want it, you're setting it up because it connects to the solution you're bringing to market. This is not an in the weeds slide. I don't need to know exactly all the this is and that's about the solution. What I really want is simple and clear. So here's an example of a slide. It's like traditional museums after, and a very simple value proposition. And again, I'll share these slides so you can kind of really digest them. This is going back to the Alzheimer's problem slide. And it's really simple, you guys. There's not a ton of text on these slides. Okay, we're looking at high level concepts here. Sometimes your solution slide and your product slide are the same, depending upon what you're doing. And sometimes you have this opportunity to introduce the solution and then get a little deeper into product. So again, this is a guide. You're going to adjust it for what you're doing and what feels right and kind of who you're talking to. But it is good to bring your product, if you have one, into, and I say that because at idea stage, sometimes you don't have something developed that you can show, right? But if you have one, it's good to represent it in your deck. And so here's an example of that, right? Again, really simple, calling out the key product areas and showing screenshots. Here's another one, really simple. This does a couple of things, especially at that idea stage or seed stage, early pre-seed seed stage, is it shows me that you have a product. It shows me what it looks like. Those are good things. And it can help me walk through, you know, how actually a user might experience what you're doing. I think it's really important to make this case. This goes back to that kind of persuasive story. How are you doing something different than what's already on the market? And so it's not like, you know, so now we have, you know, hey, we developed this thing and now we have sliced bread, and it's kind of like, well, that's already a thing. Why is your sliced bread better than everybody else's, right? And so I think it's really leaning into, I'll use the example of the narrow toe versus wide toe, right? Like, shockingly, there are not a lot of shoemakers on the market who develop wide toe shoes, right? And we've, you know, chosen to do this as a result of XYZ, and this is how we're doing it in a way that increases performance, honors aesthetics, whatever it is, right? Like, how are you differentiating that product with a demonstration that this is what your customer really values and wants, and nobody else has thought of it yet or done it well, you know? This is also sometimes a great place to introduce why you guys are the best team to do this. This is why we're doing it. This is how we see the problem, and this is why we see it differently. And this is why we're building the solution. So sometimes this is a good place for that. Okay, I'm going to pause here. What questions do we have? And then a minute, as you guys are thinking of questions, I'm going to suggest that we have some volunteers who walk us through problem and solution. Just introduce the problem and then follow it with your solution. So I'd love to hear a few additional people share. Yes, Lillian, question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all this really great information. I'm kind of curious, and I apologize if this is really obvious. I'm sort of thinking about the different stages of fundraising and the different stages of just being a new company, and how these pitch decks kind of grow and adapt depending on what stage you're in. And so all of this information is awesome. And I'm sort of thinking of it being one of the initial pitch decks. How do you elaborate or change, but not too much, based on where you currently are, but you're still pitching just at different phases in your company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will point you back to the TechCrunch teardowns, because they go from pre-seed all the way to Series B. So you can see how, and they might even go beyond that, but they have decks at each stage. So you can kind of see how that evolves. And really, as you progress and are raising larger rounds, you still have to make the case for problem solution. Like, you still have to set that up for people so they understand like what you're doing and why you're doing it. But those decks, as you evolve, you're going to be leaning a lot more heavily into your performance. So early stage, and we'll get into this as we move through the deck a little further. Early stage, you know, when you don't have a lot of data from customers using the product or revenue growth or things like that, where you can show that this is, you know, really there's traction in the marketplace. you're really making the case for this team can execute. There is a really large market that we're going to go after, and this is a really valuable solution that's addressing a gap in the market. So that's like you're really leaning into that, and you have to kind of make the case, and that's where a lot of the storytelling really does help in painting that picture, because you're really selling a vision. The later stages, as you move down kind of the road a little bit, and you start to have a product in market, and you're seeing customers, and you're seeing growth, you have a lot more data to start to talk about. Here's where the traction is. Here's how we're going to build our team. Here's how we're going to enter new markets. Here's how we're going to expand sales. So you're really leaning into execution. And you know, you're still setting that vision for the world that you're going to create, but now you have a lot more data to demonstrate where you are on that journey. Does that make sense?
That makes, yeah, totally. No, thank you so much. And it answered something that I didn't even know I was like curious about. Then I said, oh yeah, I was probably should have asked that too. So yeah, I think one of the reasons why this came up in my brain was because I was thinking about like exactly what you answered. So that was super helpful. And also sort of once you get buy-in by investors and even your market, but you still have to keep pitching. When you have buy-in, what more can you add to keep that, like retention essentially?
Yeah, well, then it becomes a matter of scale. So like, you know, and then as you track towards like those later stage rounds, they're looking at exit, like how are they going to get their, well, everybody along the way is like, how am I getting my money back, right? And
Yeah.
then some. So it's like, then as you start to hit kind of that growth and expansion stage, you're looking at, okay, is this, you know, are we thinking about acquisition? Are we thinking about public markets? Like, what are we thinking about as this company, you know, starts to see this kind of success? So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it totally is. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for putting the link in the chat, Julianne. That was really helpful too. And a bookmark on.
Let's see. So does anybody want to practice? Do a problem solution practice?
Yeah, I can go.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so we're starting an edtech company called Course Assist. That is a AI-powered question answering system for instructors and students. So currently, most courses, they still do manual question answering using Piazza. The instructor has to manually answer students' questions, but as classes get bigger and bigger, there's so much student demand for help, but then instructors can't keep up with the demand. And at the same time, students, for many of the technical courses, students can't rely on ChatGPT because it still gives misleading answers. And that's where we come in with Course Assist, which is a LLM-powered question answering system that is trained on the course material for each course. So the answers are very course specific, and it comes directly from the knowledge from the course. And now we have about 400 users. And we're trying to get our first sale from UC Davis.
Great. I love that you bubbled up, and I think this is something that I failed to add to the elevator pitch section, and I think is really important when you're early and you have users. That's huge. And highlighting that immediately, again, gets people's attention, like, oh, you've built something that people are, you've already got people using it. That's interesting. I want to know more. So great job on that. Can you talk a little bit about who the buyer is going to be?
Yes, the buyers are universities, and specifically we target department heads, department chairs, because they have the purchase power. So currently we're talking to the department chair of the computer science department at UC Davis. And
okay, great.
He's considering purchasing our product.
Great. So here's an interesting and common situation where you have the customer, who is the person that is paying money for the product, is different than the user in this case, which is the professor and the students, right?
Yes.
And so there's different ways to do this, and you have to play with it to figure out like what lands. But tell me a little bit about what the problem for the department chair is. Why what are they concerned about in this case? Is there a staff burnout issue? Is there a student performance issue? Like, why is this something that your department chair might be interested in?
Yeah, so currently there is a budget shortfall at UC Davis, and people have been thinking about how to cut costs. And currently, a TA is actually very expensive. You not only had to pay them a salary, but also you had to pay for the tuition, which is a lot. So they're trying to think about ways to use AI to cut down the costs on human labor. So this is one way that they can do it by using the AI-based system to help to address the student demand for tutoring.
Okay, great. And so as you think about your problem statement, you might lean into, as universities face increased pressure, from a cost standpoint, but don't want to sacrifice, student learning outcomes and experience. They're having to face this challenge of how do we, aid students in getting through really technically challenging content with less team time, less, staff time, right? And so in a way that's trusted, accurate, and reliable, right? And so you can start to play with that problem of, the customer who's the purchaser, and really, like, as you think about, like, how many department chairs would there be that would buy this kind of solution at how many universities? Now, when you have customers and users, you have to demonstrate that the users are going to get value out of the solution, because obviously, like, the buyer isn't going to pay for something that doesn't work for the end user. So there's a way to tell that story, and I really recommend that you play with it. But I think what I didn't hear in your initial framing was the pain point for your customer, who is the department chair. So really thinking through, like, what are they trying to solve for? And they're trying to solve for maybe cost of delivering this content or supporting students, and the time that it takes, while also continuing to drive really good student outcomes, right? And so that's something that I would play with there.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else before we go on to the next one? Okay, I'm going to keep going, but we'll have more time for practice. Okay. So if you are raising venture funds, you're going to have to demonstrate that the market size is pretty sizable, because this is the way that funds will get a return, right? You have to be able to scale large enough to increase the value of your company to a point that you can exit and provide multiples. So it's a great exercise to do even if you're not raising funding, because if it's a market size of one person, you probably don't want to spend your time on it, right? And so it's really like identifying what is the opportunity that you're addressing here. There's two common ways to tell the story of market size. There's the top-down approach, where we're really estimating the market size based on total addressable market, and then kind of narrowing that down based on certain assumptions to what we would call those TAM, SOM and SAM, the service addressable market. So you narrow it and say, this is the market that we're targeting inside of this large market. I'll show you an example in a minute. The bottoms up market size is estimated by kind of pulling some data points and then calculating. So it's like, hey, I think there's this many bike owners that want to keep their bikes, and there's this many bike exchanges, and each transaction is worth $10, and we take a fraction, and so we do this multiple, and then that's our market size, right? So bottoms up. Here is an example of top down. Again, these slides are helping investors see that you understand the opportunity. It really tells a little bit of a story around also who your target customer is and how you're going to market, but we'll dive into that in a little bit. So this is a top down. Here is one example of a bottoms up, where we're really looking at, in this case, dollar per sale, number of drivers, number of households, and then you can calculate the size of the market that you think you're addressing. Here's another example of bottoms up. So you can kind of do the math. And it just depends on the market you're in and how much data you have, you know, and there's different ways of telling the story. You can do it in both ways, but you really want to help set the stage for why this is a really good growth opportunity. It's funny, there's so many pitches that I've seen where they forget to tell me how they're going to make money. It's kind of an important part. So make sure you include it. This is really about like, how do you do that, right? And so I'm sure you're all familiar with like the different types of business models, B2B, B2C, enterprise SaaS, marketplace, all the things. Subscription, you know, there's all different kind of models for making money. It's really easy to kind of just say, our assumption is that we're going to have this model, this price, this how much it costs, this how much we're going to make, you know. Really what we're looking at here is, as you're telling this story, how do customers spend money with you? Can you make money? And that is not the same thing, right? If a customer is willing to spend $100 with you, but it costs you $99 to make the product and you make $1, and then you have that dollar to pay your team, you're not making money, right? And early days, sometimes that's the case, but if you can show that the cost of goods goes down over time and that the margin will increase over time as you prove, then that's okay. But it is important to show both how customers will spend money with you and your assumptions behind the profit in that. And then, is it scalable? Is this a business model that you can scale? And again, like something that's really like dollars per hour, or, you know, a lot of service-based businesses, those are much harder because it's like you have a finite amount of team time. You need people to deliver the service. And it's not that it's not at all scalable, but it's much harder versus something like an enterprise SaaS where you stand up the platform and then you do a bunch of marketing and you get, you know, you can go from 1 to 10,000 customers, you know, pretty rapidly, right? And so using the same tool. So these are some of the things that we're looking at here. This is an example of a business model slide. There are lots of different kinds. This is representing a marketplace. It's one of my favorite, but I think it's an example. I don't have a ton of examples on this one. I didn't find any that I really liked, and I have some from our companies, but I need to ask them if I can share. So if you have questions on that, we can certainly workshop it, but I think that the headline is make sure you tell us how you make money. Go-to-market is equally as important. Sales is really hard. I'm sure you know that. It's harder than you think. Especially after those initial early adopters, sometimes. And those early adopters are often in network. And so it's like, hey, that's great that your longtime business partner and best friend said they would buy your solution. What happens after that, right? And so this is really around your thoughts and thinking around how you're going to reach your customers. You know, who are your partners? What channels are you using? Again, UC Davis has a lot of companies coming into highly regulated markets, and those are different paths to market than, you know, a B2C company, right? And being able to talk about like, hey, we need to hit these milestones, or we need to have these credentials or what have you to be able to address this market. This is how we're doing that. So this is really, really important, because if you have a great product but you don't know how, or you can't get it to market, you don't have a company. And it's just, we have a lot of founders who really love their product and they build really great products, but they sit at home with their product, you know, and you have to be able to get this into the hands of your customers. So here's an example of a go-to-market slide that is actually not super beautiful, but very effective. You know, they're just kind of walking through, okay, here's our target geography, here's our channel, here's who we're working with, here's who's going to buy, who's the buyer inside the organization. And they can talk through this and really help me as an investor understand that they know how they're bringing this product to market through, you know, this plan. And it's high level. Of course, we'll dig in, you know, after the pitch, but it demonstrates that there's been thinking put into this that aligns with the industry that they're addressing. So I think it's really effective. This is so important. And I think it depends again on who you are, where you're at. Traction speaks volumes for, you know, your value proposition, your ability to go to market, you know, business model, pricing, all the things. If you have traction, like the course company that just spoke and said we already have 400 users, that's a highlight. And you should make sure that you are highlighting it. Sometimes you might even highlight this sooner in the presentation, depending on where you're at. And you would definitely pull it into the elevator pitch if you have compelling traction. So it really speaks to a company with promise when you can generate early traction. So, you know, we're answering the question of how's it going? You know, who have you convinced to buy your product? Depending on the stage, if you're like idea, early stage, like pre-seed, you don't really have revenue yet, but you've convinced people to use the product. And again, like the course app, it's like, hey, look, we don't have our first paying customer yet, but we got 400 people on the platform using it. That's great. That's data that you're collecting. That's feedback you're collecting. That's, you know, data that you can bring to your first customer to sell into them, right? So it's going to vary. This slide is going to vary based on where you're at. And this, Lillian, is one of those slides that as the company grows, this slide is going to look very different. You got to tell your best story. You got to figure out where you're seeing the traction. And then, you know, just really show that momentum. So here's an example of a great traction slide. It's like, awesome, we grew 5x growth in 4 months. That's compelling, you know. So the data, you know, it's funny. It's like the J curve, right? Like everybody expects to see it or wants to see it. But I think it's really about demonstrating this. And I'll say, as an early stage founder, like it's your job to try and drive this as hard as you can, right? Like this is really, again, depending on the industry, but this is really important. Here's another example. This one, no graph, it's just key metrics. Naming brand name customers that are recognizable. So you're like, oh, dang, you got Typeform. That's, you know, that's notable, right? And I'm paying attention and asking more questions. Okay, pausing for questions. What questions do you guys have? Feeling good? All right, we're getting there. We're almost done. Okay, competition. This is not a story about your competitors, okay? So I've seen companies like, you know, you do the competitive matrix and then they spend, this goes back to the question about time at the beginning. How do I I'll get all this in 30, 60, 90 seconds, 5-minute pitch? Don't spend it talking about your competitors, right? But it is really important that you have a competition slide, because what does that say? That says you understand the landscape you are entering and you're not doing it blind and you're aware of where you need to win, right? And that's important. I want to know that you know, and that you're going to be honest with me about what does this look like? Don't tell me there are no competitors out there. That is rarely, rarely, rarely the case, right? So it's like, how are you showing me you know what it takes to win in this market? Part of that is by helping me understand where you fit in the market compared to the other people who are trying to address this. And if there truly are no other people addressing it, then what are people doing today? There's an existing alternative, and it may be human behavior, choice, whatever, do nothing, but you still have to get people to move from doing nothing to doing your thing. So you have to address it, because this is one of the friction points that you are going to have to spend money on. You know, this is like, I have to convince people that they shouldn't be doing these things and they should be doing my thing. And so this is like understanding where that friction is important. So with that, I will say, don't run through the list of competitors and say, well, they do this and this, but not this, and they do this. And, you know, it's really saying like, look, here's the space. We're different because we are doing things that our competitors are not. Here's where we are filling the gap. And you show the screen and everybody can kind of see and they can ask questions if they have more questions. Does that make sense? This is what that can look like. It's very typical. It's the 2x2 matrix. You're always distinguished up and away from everybody else. And so in this case, you know, it is our friends up here, Ferret up in the top right, you know, standing alone, right? Another example of that, this one I really like, and it's a completely different kind of company, but what I really like is he doesn't actually name other brands. He just names other solutions and he talks about why it's different. So it's like, hey, there's these existing alternatives like the tag, engraved metal tag or injected microchips, but these are the problems and here's how we're different. So it's not even naming brands, it's just naming kind of solutions and the landscape. So you can really understand that this person isn't going in not having looked up and around to see what are they competing against. Team, okay, this one's so important when you're young. This is like, we don't have a lot of data. This is what we were talking about before is like, we don't have a lot of traction. We don't have a lot to measure. So what are we betting on? We're betting on the team, right? And so this is a great opportunity to tell your story. Again, depending on the company, this may end up at the top of your slide deck. I see that a lot when we're dealing with a lot of our deep science companies where I need to know that the person on stage has the credentials and background and team to build a company in this really difficult space. So I like that slide sometimes really early on just to say, hey, this is serious business and we got a serious team and we can execute in this market. And that just kind of takes that, you know, objection that might be in my mind, like, wow, this is, you know, like, how are they going to do this? But again, these are things that you'll have to figure out as you go through. And so what I will say is oftentimes we see this as like a yearbook page, you know, it's like names and pictures, and then people present it and be like, and this is Joe, and Joe's our CEO, and this is Sally, and Sally's our CTO. And it's like, okay, well, you don't need to you know, it's like, you don't have to introduce them that way, right? Like, what do I care about the team? What am I going to remember about the team? What I want to see is founder market fit. I want to see that you are building a team of founders, advisors, early employees that really know the space or have the skills to do what you're trying to do. And so here's an example. This is a team that's building a solution in the travel space. It's a SaaS solution for travel. And then they've just got a headline. It's like, we've been doing this, right? And then, you know, the pictures are great. I like seeing the people, you know, but it's not just a yearbook page, right? Like, we're really speaking to why this team is right to build this company. Here's another example. Advisor board, and it's really like, again, in this case, like calling out the expertise and in some cases the companies that they've worked with that are relevant to the space that this company is being built in. Again, with a lot of our teams who are addressing kind of highly technical solutions, this can be really important. All right, almost there. And then we'll take questions at the end. Financial projections, depends on where you're at. As a company, it is good to help people understand how you think you're going to grow, when you'll reach profitability, how you're going to acquire customers. It depends on the audience. It depends on the purpose of the pitch. It depends on how much time you have. I think it's good to have a really simple slide, or usually I like bar graphs or, line graphs that will show progression over time. Everybody knows these are going to change. These are not accurate. Everybody knows that. But we'll want to see that there's been some thinking put into the assumptions that you're working towards. You'll revise it as you go and as you learn, but we like to ask a lot of questions here around what were your assumptions when you built this and how are you thinking you're going to achieve that, just to see how are you thinking about this, not is your number exactly correct. So hopefully that makes sense. Same thing with milestones, especially for companies in highly regulated industry. They may not hit revenue for a long time, but they have some really key kind of regulatory milestones that they need to hit. This helps kind of show, here's where we're at. We got this grant. We're in, 510K, whatever. It's like, it helps us kind of walk through that journey. How far have you come? Where are you at today? Where are you going? Just give me a quick snapshot. All right. If you are in a competition or in a meeting where the investment ask is the thing, you should have this slide. Usually comes at the end. And you should know how much you are raising and how you will use the funds. This is a simple looking slide. Does not have to be really complicated, but I will tell you that there is a lot of thinking underneath this slide, and the person who is presenting and will be answering questions should really be very well versed in how the company is thinking about this, including what are you raising on? Safe, convertible note? What are your terms? What, do you have a valuation cap? How much are you raising? How much have you already raised? How are you using the funds? What if you don't raise the funds? Will you take less? Like all these kinds of questions that will come in around this. It's really important to work as a team to make sure whoever's presenting is really ready to answer those questions. And use of funds, so critical. Please don't just say marketing. We get that a lot. We're marketing. Okay, that's not helpful, right? Like you can see here, they have very specific things that they're trying to hit and they're spending money against. I really like the way that they did this. And then wrap. So often a good close, strong close and call to action. Human attention. Hopefully you've grabbed them up front with a great compelling problem and high energy and welcome and the things. There's a lot in the middle there. You may lose people. You want to bring them back at the end, right? And so make sure you don't fizzle out, especially in pitch competitions. It's back to back to back in the big bang, I know, and Capitalize and others. It's like, look, these guys are sitting here, they're going to listen to 10 more of these, right? And it's really easy, if you're like pitch number 8, right? You're like, great, I'm like, they're just like, is it time for a bathroom break? Can I get some more coffee? Whatever, right? And so it's your job to kind of keep the energy up and to really summarize why you're a great company to invest in. You may repeat even some of the stuff in your title slide and then conclude, bring them into that call to action and, help us create this vision that we've painted for you in the future, be part of the journey, right? And so you really want to make sure that you end with energy. Some guidelines. Make sure you learn about your audience beforehand, know who you're pitching to as much as possible, do your research. Voice, body language, eye contact, all these things actually matter quite a bit as we communicate our story. So practice and, get feedback. It's hard. It's really vulnerable to be up there, both selling yourself in some ways and your company and your ideas. It's a really vulnerable position to be in. And so kudos to you for embarking on this journey because it's not easy, but it gets easier and better the more you do it. And if you can collect feedback and safe spaces before you have to go and pitch in front of an audience or investors, and if you can take that feedback, not personally, but as an opportunity for growth, it's just going to really serve you well in the long run. Again, with a lot of our technical founders, there's propensity to use a lot of jargon. Again, depending on who you're pitching to, that may not land. So really know your audience, and as much as possible, try and simplify your language and be really clear. Again, it just depends on your audience, but I remove as much jargon as possible or explain what you're talking about. You saw the slides that I showed as examples. There are not 5,000 words per slide in 10-point font, right? So don't do that. That's a thing. Don't do it. Limit details, spend time on your visuals, be intentional about the content on your slides. Start strong, end strong, and try and tell a compelling and memorable story. Good resources. Again, I'm sharing the deck. These are some of my favorites, but there's tons and tons and tons of information out there. And so it's hard, sometimes overwhelming. Feedback will be overwhelming. You'll have really great investor A tell you this, and really great investor B tell you this, right? Opposite. And it's your job to be like, how do I feel about that? Which one resonated? I need to go gather more data, get curious, ask questions. Why do you say that? What would make you feel differently? Or how could I help clarify that for you, or whatever, right? Like, get curious, not defensive, as much as possible when you get this feedback and pushback. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique. That was amazing. And I really, really appreciate your advice about feedback and being thoughtful and discerning about the feedback that comes in. As somebody who's on kind of the back end of the Big Bang, I get to see the different feedback that the judges give before I send it out. And some of it can be very different, depending on the judge's expertise, their background, their familiarity with the concept or with the idea. So I just think that advice to be curious, but not necessarily take all of it, or, question some of it, is just really great. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, or if anybody wants to give it a run or ask for feedback now, we can do that. And then I just want to say that I always love supporting, especially as you're heading into the Big Bang. And I know Julian will share this, but you have my email here if you want to do a run through, or if you have questions or would like feedback. Don't hesitate to reach out. I am not always the very fastest on my email. Sometimes they get a little buried, but I'm happy to try and make some time and provide that feedback if I can. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Monique. That's super generous. So you mentioned that you're comfortable sharing these slides. For everybody who's on this call, I will post the slides on the website tomorrow morning, and we'll post the recording on the website probably sometime next week. So if you know anybody who wanted to come and wasn't able to make it, please let them know that the information will be on the Institute's website. So I think I highly encourage you to ask Monique questions while you have her here and while you're here. I'm also happy to stick around a little longer and answer any questions you might have about Big Bang in the next iterations of the competition. So I think I've got my eye on the chat. Feel free to raise your hand or just speak up. Okay, so looks like there is a question here. What are the main differences of market research and competition research?
Great question. So on the market side, what we're really looking for is the opportunity. So the size of the market, like in the example of, well, and I have to go back. I'm not going to go back to that, but say you're selling ice cream, it's like, how many people in the world eat ice cream or something like that, right? Like that's the opportunity, is like, how many are there? And competition would be like, hey, how like who else is selling ice cream? Or maybe it's like, how many people in the world want to eat ice cream that's non-dairy, right? Like, and it's like, okay, so how many people are lactose intolerant but like dessert or something? You know what I mean? Like, you're trying to identify like, what is the opportunity? The competition is who's already doing that, and what are the ways that they're doing that well, and where are they missing? It's like, okay, imagine that, well, XYZ company is selling non-dairy ice cream, but they only have vanilla, so we're entering the market, we're selling non-dairy ice cream, but we have 5 flavors and low sugar and these qualities, and so we're healthy and delicious and whatever, right? And so you're differentiating yourself from what already exists. So think about market research, and they feed each other. So you're gonna pull, as you do that market research, information on both of those, but the way you articulate it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
thank you
then-
so much.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we're right at 6:30, and lots of thanks in the chat, Monique, and just appreciation for the examples that you shared, which made it just totally enhance the presentation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me.
I think we need to have you earlier because this was so useful and included so much that I think would have been helpful for executive summaries. But it's a learning experience for me.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think it's one of those things where it's like, you're not building the deck till later, but all of the thinking that goes into building the deck is something that you're really thinking about as you're communicating your story, even in that first round. So yeah. Yep. Well, happy to help however. You just keep me posted.
I will. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for coming. We'll say goodbye. Have a wonderful night, and I'll be in touch with all of you soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much,
Thank
Liam.
you.
All right. Bye. Good night.
Thank you again. That was so
Yeah.
wonderful. I learned so much. And we're trying to figure out what to do with these workshops for next year because you had a great turnout. It's been very variable. And we try to offer the workshops all year, but sometimes the ones that are farther away from the competition aren't very well attended. And then people have conflicts in the evenings and they want to come, but they're unable to. But that was just so, so useful. And I was really glad to see so many Big Bang competitors on because they've got to work on their decks in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, thank you. Yeah. If I can help in any way, or if there, and also feedback, I'm always open for feedback. So if there's stuff that I can do better, or if there's content that you'd like to see that I didn't really touch on or whatever, please let me know.
I mean, I thought it was just perfect. One thing that you brought up that I really loved and that I want to look into is we don't I think traditionally haven't told the finalists who the judges are. And I loved your reminder and just suggestion that competitors do the research and understand who they're pitching to, because I do think that is really important. And so I think that's something I'm going to bring up with the team.
Yeah, I think that could be really good practice for them.
Okay. Okay, well, I think, you've been so generous with your time. I'm going to let you have your evening.
Yeah, thank you. All right, that sounds good. Well, let me know if you need anything else, but otherwise have a great night, and I'll share the slides with you.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye, Monique.